Okay, so this is a picture of Werner von Braun presenting his concept of a rotating space station in 1952. The station itself is 70 meters wide. It houses amenities such as crew quarters, scientific laboratories, and even a military observation deck. They were really going to build this thing. They built a mock-up on Earth and they span it to test artificial centripetal force and artificial gravity. He wasn't the first to come up with this kind of grand idea, though. In 1895, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky came up with the concept of artificial gravity originally, as well as the idea of solar energy from space and space greenhouses. And in 1929, Hermann Potkonnik came up with this black and white drawing of early design of a rotating space station. 1929. So, how is it that after maybe 130 years of these visions being in place, not to mention even the grander visions proposed in the 60s and 70s of bases on the moon and Mars, how is it that in 2024 we're left with this? Now, I'm not saying the International Space Station is a bad thing. There have been a lot of interesting scientific studies done on board. It's hosted a lot of interesting scientific instrumentation. But it's just a bit boring, It can house, I think, 6 astronauts at a maximum. It's all micro-G, it's all weightlessness, and it's quite small, and it's been around a long time. And basically, space stations since Space Lab have looked the same. The Mir looked very much like this. The new Chinese space station looks quite similar. So, it's just a little bit boring, unfortunately, and it's a shame. But before we get into the reasons why, let's talk about the need for space in general. Because what I hear of a lot when I talk about space exploration and its importance is, hey, what about Earth's problems, right? What about the pollution we have here on Earth? What about the bad governance, poverty, the threat of climate change, the threat of war, crime, inequity? What about all this stuff, all this shit that we need to sort out? How can you be thinking of going to space when there's all this here? And I reply to them with the following. First of all, right back at you. We spend massive amounts of money on extravagancies all the time here on Earth. We don't need to go to space for that, right? This hotel in Saudi Arabia next to Mecca cost $15 billion to build, Look at Dubai, look at Singapore, look at luxury yachts, look at private jets, look at massive villas, We are very good at wasting money with little tangible benefit to others. So why are we penalizing space for this? But, the fact is that space has a lot of tangible benefit for others, right? So there's not even an argument. Now, let's go to the first one. The first one is Earth's observation. Now, one could argue that we wouldn't know what Earth's problems even were without space. Without space observation, we'd have very little clue about climate change. We'd have a dim idea of the Earth warming up, but we really wouldn't understand why, and we'd have no idea about climatic systems. It's only with satellites in space, due to the urge to explore space, that we have any idea of what deep shit we are in as a society right now. And, that's not to say that, not even mentioning that we couldn't tell each other about it because we wouldn't be able to call each other using satellite communication, and we wouldn't be able to meet each other about it because we wouldn't have satellite navigation either, and Google Maps. So space actually has massive tangible benefits for the rest of the society, unlike a lot of other extravagancies which people spend money on Earth. Okay. Now, inspiring STEM is a massive one for me personally. I studied physics largely because I wanted to be an astronaut, largely because I was inspired by space as a kid. I ended up working at the European Space Agency and then founding a clean tech firm. Without space, I wouldn't have done any of those things. And if I talk to any technical person right? Generally, they have no problem with space exploration. Why? Because they were, most of the time, originally inspired by it. Okay? Most technical people here on Earth who actually solve Earth's problems and help us get out of this conundrum love space because they were inspired by it, right? And so future space exploration will only inspire more and more children to get into technical fields of study and really help us progress as a society. And then we get to democratizing effect of space and technology in general. The Industrial Revolution could be argued was very democratizing because it empowered individuals to start businesses and become wealthy. Business owners could really ramp up operations, whether that be a mine or a train company, or a shipping company, and they were empowered and they built wealth and they were able to rise socially. Okay, and this opened up the social structure of the UK and then the rest of the West. And it's been doing so for thousands of years. Ships were invented to open up trade, empowering traders and mercantile activity. And even agriculture could be argued to have empowered people. So moving forward, space exploration is going to open up massive amounts of new technology. And this will provide opportunities. Space exploration itself will provide opportunities. People will be able to engage in it. People might even be able to move planet in the future and have access to opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And I hope this new technologies that are developed because of space exploration will help every single individual on Earth. But why is it that these moon bases that we were talking about, why is it that they don't exist yet? What actually happened? And there are a number of reasons. The first is that space access is prohibitively expensive. The Saturn V cost about $1.5 billion in today's dollars to launch. The space shuttle costs about the same, right? And none of these endeavors, the moon program, the space shuttle, the International Space Station, none of them actually produced a return on investment. Sure, they inspired STEM. Sure, technological spin-outs changed the world forever. And yes, that inspired more economic activity and was very beneficial for the world. But in terms of monetary output from the initial investment put in to those endeavors by the government, nothing was seen in return, right? And unfortunately, in this world of capitalism we live in, returns are very, very important for any enduring or sustainable economic activity. And, that's one of the reasons that it stagnated. That's basically it. So, but where are we now? Now we're at a point where launch costs has come down from about $25,000 a kilo to LEO, low Earth orbit, to just under 1,000, which is what Falcon Heavy can offer it for. This is 1,600 was shown in 2020, but now it's just below $1,000. So this is 25 times less than it used to be. And it's only coming down, right? So Starship, people are expecting the cost per kilo to low Earth orbit to be $200. So that's 100 times less than it was in the 60s. That's orders of magnitude. Now, Elon Musk wants it to come down to $20, which would be 1,000 times less. But let's say $200 for now. And this will still be an amazing level up for space exploration. And the reason that it's achievable is because of reusability. To date, rockets have been operated like you'd operate a 737 one time over the Atlantic Ocean. You'd build it, you fly it over the Atlantic Ocean, and then you destroy it. And then you would fly a new one that you built there in Europe back, right? And that's one of the reasons space is so expensive. It's kind of madness, this expendability of boosters. So by being able to reuse these boosters, we're massively bringing costs down, because the only operational cost is the maintenance, and hopefully not much maintenance on like the shuttle, and then fuel cost. So opening up space in this way will result in moon bases, Mars bases, massive payloads to low Earth orbit, which will result in massive orbital structures and much larger instrumentation in space. And it will also lead to military assets. So in the next decade or two, space is going to massively change and open up. So how did SpaceX actually do this? Well, beyond having a crazily driven CEO, they were able to leapfrog legacy design restrictions. What does that mean? Well, space is dangerous, and building a piece of space hardware means complying with tons and tons of requirements, because you don't want it to break, right? It's very important it operates safely. So there'll be requirements on how to solder wires together, on the dimensions of different units, how to weld seams, on every single element you can think of the space construction. And so when you have a design in place, then to change it is really, really difficult, because you might not be complying to all these requirements, right? You have to think about all these requirements before putting through any change. And in the end, it was just very, very difficult and too much hassle to be worth it. So what SpaceX did is that they started from scratch. And one prime example is that they had a microchip. And they were like, this is an advanced microchip. This is way more advanced than any existing microchips in rockets today. Is this space-worthy? And the quick answer was, it's even more space-worthy than existing hardware. So yes. So then they were like, okay, well, then we can use these tiny microchips to massively increase computing power on board our rockets at a fraction of the previous weight and size that same computing power would have taken up a few decades ago. And because of that, we can automate landings of the boosters back on Earth. And then they did this for other sorts of hardware and other designs in the rocket. And so basically by starting from the beginning, they were able just to leverage latest technology to the maximum extent, unlike legacy players. And finally, because they build everything in-house and they mass manufacture their engines as well, they're able to benefit from those lower costs and leverage that massive efficiency increase through quicker design iterations, as everything is internal. So those are the reasons that SpaceX has won the space race, and why they've been able to achieve what they've achieved with Starship. So, our mission based on what's happened then is to open up LEO. And why is this? Because SpaceX and NASA and ESA, they're not interested in LEO. Been there, done that. They're interested in the moon, they're interested in Mars, they're interested in long-distance planetary missions. Right, LEO is boring. LEO, we've scienced out LEO. But it's still very, very interesting for commercial operations. And many, many people around the world would love to experience it. So there's massive opportunity to be had in LEO. And that's where we come in. This is where I'm presenting Atlantis Space City, which is a concept for a large rotating space hotel in low Earth orbit. This is a concept of what it could look like. In this concept, 56 rooms are offered to 112 guests in total. An artificial gravity at 0.75 G is created. The whole thing is about 200 meters wide and leverages, to boot, some starships as habitation modules as well. So let's step back and look at the market initially, because without a market, no new technology is really worth its weight. So, there are 16 million people around the world with over $10 million in assets. Let's say 1 in 20 of those was willing to part with 15% of his or her net worth to go into space. Now, I think it will be much more than that. I think it will be more like a third. But let's say 5% for now. 1 in 20 people. Just that alone is 800,000 people, which is enough to keep 10 Atlantis space hotels at full capacity for 20 years. There's a massive, massive market out there. And that is assuming a room rate of $1.5 million for a 7-night stay, or $2.5 million for an executive suite. Now, per guest cohort, that's $92 million of revenue. And that equates to $3.3 billion of revenue per year, even allowing for downtime of the hotel to allow for maintenance. And after launch costs and operational costs, that gives $50 billion of net income over the station lifetime. After those operational costs, net income. So just one hotel is a massive, massive opportunity. It's just astounding, right? And if we back calculate, what a reasonable return on investment would be for any large infrastructure projects, and we assume an 8 to 14% annual ROI, that gives a $4 to $11 billion budget for the initial design and construction of Atlantis, without even operating costs or launch costs being taken into account. Right? It does assume a $10 million price tag per Starship launch for every guest cohort, but this is assumed to only begin between 2030 and 2035, so Starship has a lot of time to develop until then. So a lot of people will think, okay, 4 to 11 billion, that's still pretty small, especially compared to 150 billion for the International Space Station. But I would argue that the International Space Station was built by the shuttle, which cost $1 to $1.5 billion per launch and required 40 to 50 launches to make. First off. Second off, this is all stuff we know. We know space stations quite well. So everything you see in Atlantis is commercial off-the-shelf hardware, whether they be inflatable hats or support struts or, airlocks in between the halves or the starships themselves, right? Every single component that you see there can be launched with a single launch and a single payload. So there's no in-orbit manufacturing or assembly of structures. Everything is launchable, prefabricated to be connected in space. And finally, because we're using, for instance, 41 inflatable hubs in this design, there's potential for economies of scale and mass manufacturing. And the same goes for the Starships. We're using 8 of them, or 9 with the emergency return vehicle. And finally, the International Space Station was built by, not just one government, but multiple governments. So there was intergovernment bureaucracy. There's the bureaucracy within the governments, and then there was the added layer of bureaucracy by governments trying to cooperate with each other. And not just on international policy, but on really important design decisions in space, right? Making hardware compatible with each other. That's quite difficult, but at the same time, very, very important. So I can't even imagine how much money was spent on engineers, project managers in general, to get all this stuff designed. It must have been ridiculous, right? And so in the case of Atlantis, we're going completely private. No governments involved whatsoever, just a small consortium of private companies. And so compatibility will be less of an issue, language will be less of an issue, and can argue that these companies will be very, very efficient as well compared to governments. So yeah, I think 4 to 11 billion is quite realistic, and it'll probably end up being around somewhere in the middle of that. And to boot, it will be 60 times larger than the International Space Station in terms of pressurized volume. 60 times. So yeah, it'll be massively more capable at the same time. And because of that capability, we'll be able to provide things like, things you've never seen in space before, like galleries and presentation rooms and live music and events, in-room dining. Everyone will have their own luxury room. Fresh food. We'll have farms up there. We'll have a botanical gardens up there. So it's going to be a very interesting stay. There'll be a lot of things on offer. And beyond that, it's not just about the views and the microgravity experience, which will be great, but we want to make a visit to Atlantis. It will be more like a personal opportunity for personal growth and reflection. So guests up there will be movers and shakers, they'll be visionaries, they'll be people who have made it in the world, right? And there'll be an opportunity to meet all these like-minded people from all over the world that you would probably not meet otherwise. And we'll be promoting events, daily talks, and even, dining experiences together where people will have the opportunity to connect. And so this community that's built during a guest stay at Atlantis, we expect to continue strongly once they return to Earth, and for guests to stay in touch, and for this community of Atlantis guests to be able to support and help each other grow long after their combined visit to Atlantis Space Station. So we feel this is an opportunity also for people to, in a way, build their future in orbit. And that's really the kind of community feel that we want people to be attracted to in Atlantis, not just because it's 400 kilometers above us. And so that's it. Thank you very much. Visit atlantisspacecity.com. And, who knows, maybe one day we'll even be able to host TED Talks in space. Thank you very much.